Welcome everyone. I think it's really interesting for me to see that we have been through a very long event, very interesting one, but particularly focused on the oil and gas industry and a part of that. And it's finally came the time to speak about, what's really happening in the power system and speak about a new technology that is rising, that is growing, and it's becoming a massive reality globally. In this session, we're going to look specifically at what's happening in pump storage. And we're going to deep dive. First, we're going to have a look at the global perspective, and then we're going to deep dive a bit further and try to understand really what is the reality in this fantastic, I would say call it fantastic, and later you'll see why, Indian pump storage market. First of all, I want to thank the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas for giving us the opportunity to be here today, organize this session, and invite us to be on stage. My name is Matteo Bianciotto. I'm the Head of Policy and Research for the International Hydropower Association. We are the voice, the global voice of sustainable hydropower. We represent the sustainable part of the sector, and obviously we include in this all pump storage developer that today believes in our mandate. Today with me on stage, we have a fantastic list of panelists. First, here on my left, Frédéric Sauze, the Executive Board Member and CEO of Andritz Hydro. Thank you, Frédéric, for joining us. Debmalya, I jumped you. I thought I exchanged the position. Anyway, Debmalya Sen, President of the India Energy Storage Alliance. And last but not least, Mr. Mohit Bhargava, Senior Advisor of AM Green Ammonia. Thank you for joining us on stage. Before we go into the various questions, just want to give you a little background on why I believe this is an essential session that needs to take place in an event like this one, why we need to speak about pump storage when we look at what's happening in the energy industry. I think that from an energy industry perspective, we are facing three major challenges today. One is a challenge that we know well, but we tend to forget too often over the latest period, which is the energy transition. We need to keep decarbonizing our power system. And this is not to make sure that they will only work better and in a more sustainable manner, but to make sure that our children will keep enjoying those power systems. Second, which is a growing challenge, and we see over the last few years on the opposite, growing more and more, is the need for the energy security and make sure that countries becomes energy independent. We are experiencing a changing in the wind. Unfortunately, I would say, and I underline the unfortunate because that's not the word I believe in, but that's the reality we are into. There is an increasing complexity, I would say, from a geopolitical perspective. And country needs to take that into consideration, one way or another. That's the world we live in. Third point, which is still a giant that we need to face, is the electrification of our industries. The demand for power is not exploding, it's booming beyond any imagination. Not only because we need to electrify those parts of the world that before were not yet capable of consuming electric power, but also because we see new type of demand coming in. We have artificial intelligence, data center. The demand is changing, demand is becoming more and more important. And electrified economies cannot fail, cannot rely on weak systems. And I think that between these three challenges, there is one technology that is needed. First of all, we will need storage. We will need huge amount of storage. And there is one technology that is mature enough, that is cost effective, and that is capable of providing a long duration electricity storage that will be essential. This is pump storage. And that's why I believe today this session is needed if we want to talk about energy. Now, moving a bit further, we look at India with great interest. We believe India is a country that has understood this urge, and we believe internationally India has attracted attention from many countries because we look at what's happening in India today as an example of how pump storage should be and could be developed internationally. In a country that has circa 50% of its gas imported and 30% of its coal imported, essential products today still to run this economy, pump storage will be essential. Now, with this little introduction that I hope has somehow clarified a bit the world we live in and why we are here today speaking about that, I'd like to start with a first question for Frédéric. So Andritz is clearly a company that is experiencing a strong position thanks to the hard work in the Indian market. And I congratulate for the fact that I think more than half of the projects at the moment are supplied that are under development by Andritz product, which is quite of a substantial achievement, I would say. From the strong position you have in this market, Frédéric, how do you see the evolution of the global electricity storage sector, specifically possibly pump storage, and where does India stand in this global perspective?
Thank you, Matteo. So, as you said, we see clearly an evolution where most of the generation was dominated by coal, oil and gas, providing very stable power to the grids, and we lived that for decades with no issues. The introduction of renewables have been taken quietly but very seriously by all countries, even countries like China, like the US, which are not necessarily openly in favor of those energies. They're really investing significantly. India, for me, is really moving ahead again very quietly, however with very big level of decision. This change of power generation from traditional rotatory power, coming from steam turbines, gas turbines, and so on, is moving now to much more static power. And the introduction of PV, wind energy on the grid is generating a lot of non-stability in the grid. We just experienced one here, yeah? So in a small scale. But this is what happens in grids like nations. You've heard about Spain. This blackout happens quietly everywhere in the world. And that comes from this lack of stability. So we cannot stop this movement of generating by renewable energy, as you said, for the reason you mentioned, Matteo. And the best way is to go back to what was the original renewable energy, hydro, which can provide different solutions, the traditional one on flow of rivers or through big reservoirs, but through new modernized solutions like pump storage. Pump storage were basically created a long time ago. There were plants more than 100 years ago. There've been a big wave in the 80s, 90s, mainly in Europe, in a few countries like the US as well, mainly playing on tariff and generating in high tariff, pumping in low tariff. That was the model. And that was stopped, leaving space for more thermal energy, nuclear energy, and so on. Now it's coming back as really an additional feature, which are those pump storage, providing those are like big hydro-based batteries for the system. They provide possibility to store energy on an upper reservoir when there is excess of, let's say, PV energy, for instance, on the grid, and it enables to generate and to produce power when needed, upon demand, or through cycles which are defined in different business plans. Today, the installed capacity worldwide is around 16 gigawatt. It's reasonable, but quite low. Plans are huge. India has announced by 2050 to grow to 100 gigawatt, which is amazing, yeah, feasible. It's a very challenging target, but this is feasible. On a practical base, with all the projects launched today worldwide, we see the possibility to be above 30 gigawatt worldwide in 2030. This is mainly driven by China. China is ordering around 20 new pump storage per year, and this is for the last 3 to 5 years, and that will continue for the coming 3 to 5 years, but very closely followed by India. And India, at the moment, has an average of 3 projects per year, but the government, the incentives, the push, and the alignment of key players, mainly private investors, are really there seriously to boost this number of investments. So we do see India, for us, as the second largest country, the second largest grid worldwide, with opportunity for pump storage.
Fantastic. Thank you, Frédéric. And really on this wave, maybe you have explained perfectly how the market is developing and why India is betting on pump storage. Maybe I'd like to hear from one of the players in this market that is effectively developing today facilities, Mr. Mohit. If you could tell us more about Greenco's plan at the moment in developing pump storage and what have been done and what further is going to happen.
Thanks, Matteo. And I think we've all been, kind of hit by the post-lunch curse. Or maybe we are still eating into people eating time. But be that as it may, thanks for having me here. As I think already Frederic pointed out, the first large PSP project in India, which was commissioned early last year, is the one by Greenco. That's 1680 megawatts. And I think it was important for everyone, although I do agree that there have been PSPs earlier in the country. I'm probably as way back as, Purulia pump storage and so on and so forth. But this is the first one which is actually kind of off river. And it is a project which was done in a reasonably fast time if we actually consider that effectively the project execution was around 4.5 years. So it's really a very neat thing to happen, and I don't know if very small group of people in this room, if they have not visited Pinapuram, you guys must have, but if you haven't, please do. So Greenco is primarily, it was set up as a renewable company about 15 years ago. And they have about 10 gigawatts of renewable capacity, wind and solar. But I think very early on, they did realize that just setting up solar and wind is not making sense. And they need to create a solution which is for firm and dispatchable power. And that is where the concept of storage came in, because we all know renewable is intermittent, and so it has its own challenges. You actually cannot rely on renewables alone to do your industrial jobs. So which is why the concept of the pump storage came in, and hats off to them for actually having completed this project in record time. What they're also planning is that, in fact, in the next 5 to 6 years, the idea is to do another 10 gigawatts of pump storage projects, out of which two, one in MP and one in Karnataka, are expected to be commissioned in the next Indian fiscal, as we say, like 26, 27. MP project I have visited, so I know it's progressing well. Like any hydro project, there were minor, geological surprises, but I'm sure that's not significant, but we'll be able to do that. The whole idea is that, and probably Debmalya can actually come in and talk more about storage, but the construct is that if you have renewables, you need storage. Otherwise, renewables become a very, very intermittent and difficult play, not only for the people, but for the grid. The grid operator is like so scared of renewables nowadays. So they have actually started saying, we need to back down this, we need to back down that. This, in spite of the fact that Government of India says renewables are must run. Mm-hmm. So we already are facing a situation where during the daytime, because of so much solar capacity, the plants are being asked to back down. So the concept of storage in general becomes very important for the whole idea. PSP is something now government is pushing also very aggressively, because while battery prices have been coming down, but as he was explaining to me earlier, so there's been some reversal because of the view taken by the Chinese government, which is where PSP becomes even more important. Because you look at PSP, so in India, we are talking a lot about Atmanirbharta or self-reliance. The idea is that we should focus on solutions which we do not depend on any other country. So we are not at the mercy of any country, maybe China or any other country, for sourcing products. And PSP fits in perfectly into that. It's a totally indigenous solution. It has a, life of what, 50, 60, 70 years? It can go on and on unless until there's some crazy problem happens. So, and compared to this, the other solution, while maybe cheap on the face of it, but if you're talking long durations energy storage, PSP again scores very clearly. In fact, what Greenco did also, and I'm ex-NTPC, so I know a bit of that. So Greenco actually signed a contract with NTPC to sell PSP. So NTPC, at that point I was there, so we had come out with a tender to buy pump storage. So about 3 gigawatt hour of storage capacity was purchased. The price, obviously I cannot give the exact numbers, but it was very attractive. It's pretty reasonable, which now forms the core or the basis of how you actually decarbonize. It's not just creating a solution, it's not competing against coal or other sources, but it gives an option. So if Indian companies today, and in the backdrop of the EU-India FTA, although CBAM is not covered in that, but if Indian companies are today looking at exporting ammonia to Europe, so the solution provided by PSP along with solar and wind becomes the key, basis which Europe will actually approve that this is fitting within our construct of green power or green ammonia. So quickly to answer your question, the target is to do about 10 plus gigawatt, which is almost 20% of what India is targeting in the next 5 to 6 years. A lot of work is being done by Andritz, and thank you for that. You guys have done wonderful work at Vinappuram, and hopefully it will be much better going forward as well. And I think PSPs are here to stay, and with the kind of volatility batteries are facing, the job of PSP becomes easier.
Thank you very much. And maybe I'd like to move the conversation to Debmalya, asking you, because we've been hearing now that pumped storage plays a vital role in supporting, balancing the power system, making them functional in a harmonious and continuous way, right? But is there more? Is there something else that pumped storage is giving to India as well that we need to value and we need to consider, and the government as well should consider at this point in time?
Thank you. Pumped hydro has many benefits. One, it's multi-stackable, right? So through a single asset, you can address multiple value chains. And so while pumped hydro has been used majorly for energy arbitrage kind of applications, but it has merit in acting in ancillary market also. It has merit in supporting your fast ramping and ramp down services. So what happens is often the debate is batteries or pumped hydro. And I answer this everywhere I go. Is batteries better or pumped hydro better? So both of them can coexist. And China is a brilliant example for that batteries, pumped hydro and renewables together giving firm power to the grid, right? Whereas batteries is of the duration of 4 hours, not that batteries doesn't perform beyond 4 hours. But then there are outliers. We have in Australia seen examples where battery has won a tender of 8 hours against pumped hydro. Similarly, we have examples of pumped hydro winning a 2-hour tender against a battery. So both examples are there, right? So, but then the sweet spot is at 4 hours. And anything beyond 4 hours is where pumped hydro comes in handy.
Yeah.
We also need to understand that the storage duration, which is today ranging between 1 to 3 hours, will progressively only increase with increasing renewable penetration. This is touted to go up to 6 to 8 hours early next decade. So early next decade, if I am requiring 6 to 8 hours of storage, I might as well start construction today. So that it will be ready to address that 6 to 8 hours of storage that we require. So pumped hydro has a very different application when we see, and it should not be compared with batteries. So it is that duration of 6 to 8 hours where it's beautifully applies to the grid. So yes, that is, and the use cases I already said. Yeah.
Thank you. No, and I agree. And I think that 6 to 8 hour plus duration, it's really what provide the energy security element. It is really what enables power system, to turn off coal plants and be sure and certain that we'll still have sufficient synchronous power and energy generation to cover eventual issues that they might encounter on the grid.
So if I may just quickly add to what he said, and there's a live example for that. The railways did it I'm sure you would have followed it. So they wanted round-the-clock power. And it came in round-the-clock power with 85% availability on an annual basis, with at least 50% availability in each 15-minute time block. I think the number came in at 4 rupees. No, 4 rupees, 13 paisa, 4 rupees, 13 paisa. So effectively what we are saying is that today, renewable round-the-clock power with 85% availability is at 4 rupees, 13 paisa, which is, comparable with any other alternate source. So effectively, this is today the least cost solution.
Yeah.
And that has been built on the back of PSP.
Yeah.
Because at least 2 of the winning bidders I know have contracted with Greenco for sourcing their pump storage from us. But I'm sure there are other guys who are actually probably thinking of battery dipping. So ultimately, it will boil down to whatever is most economic, commercially makes more sense. So I totally agree with him. Although theoretically there is a 4-hour sweet spot, I think it's more of a mental threshold which we are talking about.
Yeah.
But pump storage can be effective at 2 hours. Pump storage can be effective at 8 hours. Battery can be effective at 4 hours and 8 hours. So it depends on which side of the bed you're getting out of. So maybe.
Of course. Thank you. No, that's a very valid point. And can I just go back to a very important announcement that came out a few days ago, which is the government of India setting a roadmap to achieve 100, this is a number that for me is impressive as a European, 100 gigawatt of pump storage by 2035, 2036. Now, maybe I'd like to have a little round of discussion around that, and starting with you, Frédéric. How the industry need to gear up? Let's start thinking what we need to do now in this moment to achieve that target and be capable of supplying that level of equipment by 2035, 2036.
Such a target position, clearly India as the clear number 2. China is a bit bigger in investment, but that's an impressive target. What I think is very important here is to look at strategies. We have developed as Andritz a strategy more than 30 years ago to invest here in India for another market, which is today very well positioned. We are bringing or training new resources in hydraulic, in engineering in Europe to localize here in India this key knowledge to be fast on the market. We are almost doubling our manufacturing capacity here in near Delhi and near Bhopal for core components of those pump storage, enabling us to integrate more than 90% of the total plant value. So the example of Pinapuram for Greenco was already the case. So that will continue. This is a key part, using local manpower, local engineering, local management to really perform on a very dynamic market. And I'd like to take the example of Greenco, this Pinapuram project, the first full-scale project in India, full with a big F, because it's a huge plant, which was really an example. It was started on an early contractor involvement approach, meaning that in the meantime that Greenco was seeking the necessary permit, they were already ordering to Andritz the engineering. So we developed together with Greenco this engineering phase in the lost time, when most of the project start this phase after permitting, after financing. So Greenco took this bet to do it earlier. So that saved a lot of time in the project. And then from the day of the signature of the contract to start really the engagement of cost for supplies and manufacturing and so on, it was 2 years to deliver the first unit. And the commissioning was made 6 months after for the first unit. And we commissioned the remaining 7 units, so a total of 8 units within a very short time of 3 months. So cost reduction through volumes, as I explained, in India, through those big volumes, lead time reduction through this example, and that was only the first one. So that means through learning curves, through lessons learned, we can achieve even better than this. This will make much more competitive hydro pump storage and should preserve a good combined future, as was explained by the two panelists.
Thank you. That's very impressive. Also, the plan that Andritz has for the country, but also good to hear this explanation. Maybe looking now on the other side, what is the role of Mr. Mohit? What is the role of the? So we've heard about what is the supply chain doing, but what can now off-taker do? So what is potentially a link between ammonia production and pump storage project development? We are now jumping on the other hand of the project, right?
Yeah. Thanks for mentioning that, and I think, like any other industry, that's the most critical part. If you don't have people who are willing to pay for whatever you're building, it doesn't make sense. So I think the way Greenco and consequently AM Green, looked at this as a solution was that basically we are looking at firm and dispatchable power. we are looking at power as a solution, which is green. I do agree with Frédéric that in today's world, with the changes which have happened globally, probably green is not something everyone is pushing aggressively. But we've always maintained that green will actually grow if it's economically also making sense. So any industry who is in the money will happily go green. But if they're not in the money, then probably they need mandates and push and all that. So our idea has been that we should create a solution which is economically attractive also to the buyer. And the recent deal, I mean, one of the largest projects, one of the largest use cases where this will be used is to actually fire the green ammonia plant, which AM Green is setting up in Kakinada. And that has actually got all the clearances from the European people that, yes, that passes our requirements of being defined as green. And that is largely because we could explain to them that here is the solar source, here is the wind source, and here is the storage source. So there is very clear accounting possibility, and there's absolutely no black electron getting into the picture at all. So that's the larger construct. So if we are looking at AM Green, for example, so 1 million ton ammonia plant will require close to around 1300 megawatts of round-the-clock power. And in that, I mean, if I'm recollecting properly, we'll probably use close to 500 to 600 megawatts of storage, 8-hour storage. So that is where we are. So out of the Pinapuram pie, part of it is going to the railways already. I mean, that's contracted, and probably the supply part of it has started. Part of it will continue. Then part of it is also going for an aluminum plant.
Okay.
So these are the people who are today looking at how to use green. So when Hindalco, for example, wants to use green power to start gradually replacing part of the coal-based plants, they want a reliable solution. And one of the points which they had raised very clearly is that because we have the smelter in place, we cannot afford any disruptions. That is where PSP comes into the play.
Yep.
So that is the larger construct. Of course, now as Greenco, we are looking not only at ammonia, which remains a large play. We recently signed a contract with Uniper, and that's in public domain. So that's probably the first contract, and we hope to do a couple of them more. We're also looking at green metals, aluminum, for example. So we want to set up an aluminum factory, which will be fully powered by green. Again, that will use round-the-clock power. And then we're also looking at, in not too distant future, AI data centers. And we are not alone in that. I mean,
of course.
So PSP as an idea is today very much there within the Indian government ethos, within the entire ecosystem. And that is why we today don't have only Greenco. We have all the large players, starting from NTPC to Adani to Torrent to JSW, and everyone is trying to have. And I mean, it's quite possible the way it's happening in the solar and battery bidding. Tomorrow you'll have all kinds of people bidding the pump storage. They may or may not be able to do that's another matter. But the key to long-term renewable, sustainable solution, decarbonization of industry, bringing in more clean energy solutions, probably PSP is a very important part of that.
Thank you very much. That's well understood. I always thinking about what you just say. I would like to consider the fact that, sun shines for circa 12 hours a day, depends where you are in the world. Solar panel produced for circa 10 hours a day. That means you're left with circa 14 hours a day where you need to be capable of covering that gap if you want to secure the 24/7 productivity. And that's where I think pump storage is perfectly placed to supply that 24/7 power needed for the industry. Okay, so we have now, just to clarify, we have heard about how the sector is gearing up to provide the 100 gigawatts of pump storage over the next few decades. What can be used as a model to justify economically this project, to create bankability around this project? Now, Mr. Debmalya, I'd like to ask you one clear question, which is really fundamental in all this story. What the government could be doing now to make sure that this happens? What policy, what regulatory framework we could still be see implemented in India today to facilitate that?
Thank you. I have been given the difficult task. Okay, so
I trust, I'm confident in your skills. That's why.
so see, a viability gap funding for pumped hydro has been in talk for quite some time. It has been quite in talk for more than 2 years now. It was almost at the verge of getting approved, and then it went back. So every budget, this is one of the recommendation that we give the government, that a viability, if you're giving a viability gap funding for for battery storage, then why not for pumped hydro? Second, the recommendations for pumped hydro too, because as he said, it is really make in India. We don't have to rely on maybe China or Japan or someone else to make it in India, right? So or deliver it in India. So second part that we have been asking government for clarity is on the GST part. Now GST part we have, so it's ranges from 5 to 18%. Now that is where it is killing the game. So if it is actually made in India, then why charge it a GST which is abnormally high? That is also one of the requests that we have to governments. And third is, of course, stability in policy. We say today something, 1.5 year down the line we say something else. That just disrupts the market. That just is not good for investor confidence as well as developer confidence. So this is what we have been requesting, that stable policy, GST reforms, and looking into the viability gap funding if it is to come up.
Thank you. That's very clear. And what is interesting is that thanks to the position I have, I tend to look at policy gaps in various jurisdictions. And you can't imagine how these simple things are not only an Indian problem, but they can be easily described as a major problem of many jurisdictions where we today trying to develop pumped storage. But thank you for this intervention. So I don't know, first of all, I'd like to see if anyone else has any reaction from what's just been said, any further comments in terms of how the government, would you see potentially the governments and policymakers supporting these or any other intervention as well?
I'd like to rebound a bit on your comments and your introduction where you were talking about energy security.
Absolutely.
It's important to see that today most of the energy relies on oil, oil bales and so on. And for many countries, some more than others, there is a big dependence from other countries on oil supply, gas supplies, and so on. So now we are talking about a transition, moving to something much more local, with local manufacturing, local technology, local design, local manpower and knowledge. And if we go back to the storage, we have between batteries and pump storage exactly what you said. Batteries are today dominated by Chinese technology company. They are 20 years or probably more in advance to any other countries on those respects. So the risk for countries like India, like Europe, like some countries in America is to shift a dependency on oil and gas to a dependency on batteries. Yeah? So the mix is adding there some additional features to the equation for long-term investment.
Thank you. No, that's a very important point, actually. And it reminds me of when we had this discussion a few months ago. Same conversation with the European Commission and presenting very similar point in Brussels. Mr. Mohit, any comments from your hand from a developer and off-taker of power? What would you think could be done?
So maybe a couple of quick points. One, of course, I do agree that in the entire scheme of things today, energy security is probably more important than energy transition, and that has been, of course, India's stated position since the very beginning. I mean, when we used to get lectured on energy transition by everyone going around and coming to India or going abroad, so we always maintain that energy security is very important for a country which is developing. We are at a stage where our demand is actually exploding. We need to have resources and mechanisms on which we do not have to depend on anyone else. So which is why energy security is paramount today. I mean, Europe realized that after Russia cut off their gas. So energy security for them also became very important. beside that, I think one of the points which I wanted to add, what I understand is for some of the biddings in PSP, there was some VGF given by states. I don't know how they managed. States have given. So there is a VGF element there, but I think the view of the government at that point was, this was probably 3 years ago. Then everyone said battery is costlier and PSP is cheaper. Now, incidentally, batteries prices have come down so drastically that people are saying, why support battery? You're actually giving VGF to China. So that's the whole construct which is being discussed now. Personally, if you ask me, probably we are at a stage where battery and PSP can very easily compete against each other on any given day. So it really doesn't matter. But yes, what probably will matter, and as a developer, this is something which we have seen, the permitting, the clearances, the environment clearance, for example. How we can accelerate that. Well, government has done that. I must admit, I was part of that committee which laid out that, PSP committee was there, storage committee was there. So there were many recommendations, including on forest clearance, environment clearance, and so on and so forth. So if many of those could actually be implemented, it will help move the project execution time. So, which is important for us, because ultimately we are looking at storage. We cannot be sitting for 10 years. Like hydro projects today take anything from 10 to 12 years to get executed.
Of course. Everyone
wants the PSPs to happen in 5 years. So 5 years is actually from the day you break the ground. Otherwise, the permitting takes anything from 2 years plus. So that is something which we can do. Whether there was also another question whether these need to be appraised by the government. So that's another question, because hydro projects still need to be appraised and cleared by the government. So that is a question which is still up there. Probably we need to find a solution to that, because everything takes time. The moment we are seeking permissions, so these takes time. So this is just to add to what Debmalya said, and I agree on the GST part. We have been trying at Green so a lot of these things are pending with the government. If it happens, ultimately it'll help the people. Ultimately the prices are paid by the common man, you and I sitting in this room, who pay these ultimate prices. So if the GST can be rationalized, for renewable, government decided to put a 5% GST. If this can also be considered as a larger set or larger subset of renewables, because most of it will be used for renewables, probably a 5% GST makes a lot of sense.
Of course.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And maybe if I can just add a point, speaking from an international hydropower perspective, when it comes to clearance permitting, and there is an important tool, I think, that the hydropower sector has compared with other renewable technologies, which is the hydropower sustainability standard. This is a powerful tool that today the sector has to track, check, and certify as well the sustainability of project under development, or even project that are already been developed. And I think that this is something that definitely can help the Indian sector in moving forward faster from pumped storage development. And we strongly encourage and invite all developers in the room to check it out and consider using the standard, because it's really a tool in the hands of developers for their hand.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
Can
I like when the panel asks questions to the moderator. That's how we should always be. Please.
So to all three of you,
Yes.
One misnomer that people have against or for pumped hydro is that it's a mature tech. So not much of innovation is happening. So what kind of innovation are you seeing in this pumped hydro sector? And is it true that it is already mature and no much innovation can be possible in this sector?
So it's difficult to answer about real innovation, because as you mentioned, Mohit, the hydro plants are designed for 40 years plus. They're running 50, 70 years with very little maintenance. They are highly reliable. We visited on Tuesday a plant built by Tata Power in 1922 from our company, which is still running. Yeah, they've been upgrades, a few things, but they're still there. The infrastructure is there. So it's already a very sophisticated system. So you can always improve efficiency, producing more with less water, a bit of more output. But the real technology on the core part is limited. Where we see improvement is on the OPEX reduction. So first of all, on the CAPEX, I mentioned it. This This has to happen to maintain the level of competitivity. But on OpEx, all AI tools based on our tons of data, design data, operation data that have been gathered over 100 years are existing today, are offered to the operators to really optimize the use of their power plant, especially with all the conditions, the flexibility required, the different modes of operation, and so on. So this in this use of data AI aspect where we will see more progress over the coming years.
Yeah, please, Mr. Mohit, if you want to contribute. No, first the panelists, and then I will.
Yeah, so innovation is a very wide word, and you know that. So, but I think one of the most simplest innovations which happened in PSPs in India particularly has been moving from a regular hydro style PSP to a closed loop off river. So that was the biggest innovation, because the whole idea was that if you are blocking a river, then you get into a whole lot of issues. You're getting into multi-state challenges. You need to get clearances from the state. You're actually stopping water. So once you get to a situation where you build two separate reservoirs, pump in water once, and then by and large keep recycling that. So that was, I think, the biggest innovation, which led to a couple of benefits. One, of course, was simply time. Two was not obstructing or in any way restricting the flow of water on the main river. So that was the largest. I do agree with him that in terms of equipment, probably not much would change, because you're playing with the very fundamental physics law there. So we will probably not be able to do much there. But AI is a tool, and Greenco is an example where we're actually operating it as a cloud, storage cloud. So the entire construct today of meeting the requirement when the demand is there and how you maximize your return. So that's the whole game which is going on. So that is the innovation happening. You can add to that if you have anything.
Yes, mostly just to say that just because I come from the R&D sector as well, and what I really like to think is that a power plant have a very long lifespan. We speak the engineering part, the civil engineering of this asset can live hundreds of years. It's the forever technology, right? Once you build a hydropower plant, your grandchildren will still harvest the benefits of that. But there is a modernization that needs to happen of this plant, and every numbers of 3-4 decades, there is an opportunity, and I would like to look at an opportunity to rethink the equipment installed in these plants, and make sure that they are capable of providing the services that are relevant in that moment in time, which might have changed from the services that were considered when the plant was built, perhaps 40 or 50 or 60 years before. And I think that's when I think innovation, yes, is modernization, what I like to think of in the hydropower sector. How to make sure that these plants remain relevant, it's a challenge, but we have luckily companies as Andritz and many other great suppliers that are extremely expert on those type of intervention, and they can provide definitely great value, economic value, and social value, because we can also improve the footprint, the environmental footprint of this plant. But thank you. This is a very important, I think, relevant aspect. So I thank the panel for the question to the moderator, which is a beautiful example of a nice dialogue. I think we have more or less reached the end of the time that we had available today to discuss about pump storage, and specifically pump storage in India. I like just to close thinking how important is the role of governments in development of this large infrastructure. Just to mention, the International Hydropower Association has also recently set up the Global Alliance on Pump Storage, which is an intergovernmental body dedicated really to enable knowledge exchange between governments on policies, on best practices, because it's important to make sure that the industry knows what are the best practices, but it's important that policymakers knows what are the best practices in terms of policies and regulatory framework that really works and need to be implemented. And we really hope to see as many states, Indian states, joining GAPS, and also the Indian government who's already active with us. Last point, we hope to see you all also in 2027. There will be a large congress in Sydney for the hydropower sector organized by the IHA, and I hope to see all the people who we had today on stage, and all the audience at the event. I want to thank one more time all the panelists for the fantastic contribution, really interesting, and I think we couldn't imagine more experienced people today to conversate about pump storage than the one we had. So thank you very much, and I invite everyone to perhaps a round of applause for the people who was with me on stage. Thank you very much.